What is good and evil, and who gets to decide it? Is it the same for every person, or can it change? We'll talk about that next, but first, as always, we start with our mission. Today we're discussing the good and the evil. What are they, and how can we truly know them? If we learn this faith, if we live this faith, if we share this faith, what will the next 100 years look like? Join the mission. If you missed the last video, this is part 4 in our series on Sister Mary O'Brien OP's book, Christian Social Principles. You can get a copy of this book over at Sophia Press. I highly recommend that you do. It's a great book. That's why we're doing a series on the first section of this book, chapters 1 through 8. This is part 4, which is on chapter 4. And in the last video, we spoke about free will and man's pursuit of happiness. And in this video, we're going to discuss what it means to say that something is good, how it is that we can know that good, and what we mean when we say that something is evil. Now, we make videos like this each week. If you want more content like this, please like and subscribe to this channel. So, what is good? Sister is going to follow St. Thomas Aquinas in explaining that the good is that which all things seek. So, in creation, there are many different natures. There's the nature of a dog, there's the nature of a tree, there's the nature of a human, and all natures are all pursuing their own fulfillment or their own perfection. But that fulfillment is going to be very different for each nature. A tree is going to be fulfilled in a different way from a dog, in a different way from a human. Each of us pursue our fulfillment differently because our end is different. So a tree whose fulfillment is to grow and to produce fruit is going to pursue that end by laying down roots to search for water, to draw in nutrients, and to give it to the ability to grow. Now, a dog whose nature is above a tree's, it has senses, right? So it's going to use its senses to pursue its ends, which is to grow and to reproduce. But it's doing this not in the manner that a tree does it. It does it in the manner of an animal, of using its senses. Now, in a moment, we'll speak about the nature of a human and how human nature is even above that of the animals, and how we will pursue our fulfillment even at a higher level. But all of these natures, regardless of where they fall or whatever their capacity, whatever the power, each nature is pursuing its fulfillment through the use of its natural tendencies, what it has by nature that it's able to do according to its nature that God gave it. Now, this is a very important distinction that she makes. This action or this pursuit that occurs in irrational creatures, trees and dogs, is going to be significantly different or at a lower level than it is for rational creatures. So just a clarification here, when we say rational creatures, we are referring to men and angels whose nature it is to know truth and to desire the good, or to pursue the good, or to love the good. So we would consider men, humans, and angels, they have that capacity, they have that power, so we call them rational creatures, where trees and plants and dogs and giraffes, they don't have the ability to know the truth. They don't have the ability to desire good things. Their nature is entirely tied up with their material bodies. So their pursuit of their fulfillment is going to be different. However, all these creatures, whether they're rational or irrational, they're all together, they're all pursuing their perfection or their fulfillment, the fulfillment of their nature. So for irrational creatures, she's going to explain that the fulfillment of their natures or their perfection is going to occur by them existing, or by them knowing the world through the sense level, but not through an intellectual level. They have no intellectual knowledge. They have of their final end. They're not dreaming of the day and planning out how they will achieve that final goal that they're working for. They're just existing on a day-to-day basis where they're pursuing their immediate needs of survival or of growing or reproducing. So now that's different from rational creatures whose our nature is to know the truth, it's to love the good, and we seek our fulfillment by pursuing the good and having a knowledge of it. Now, we are the only creatures that have the choice. We, and of course, angels, we are the only creatures that have the ability to choose the means by which we will pursue the good. As we said, animals are not, they're not out there planning out the steps by which they will achieve their final ends. But we do have that ability to pursue our final ends and to actually sit back and reflect on, okay, how am I going to do this? How am I going to carry this out? Sister's going to state that everything that man desires, we desire under the appearance of a good. So we perceive something to be good. That's why we desire it in the first place. Now, it may be that what we desire truly is good, or maybe we misperceive it and it's only an apparent good. The intellect does have the ability to misjudge or to make an error in its understanding of something. The perfect example here is fast food. We have this hunger, and maybe we, just by looking at the fast food, we can smell it, we can see it, we have this understanding, oh, this will immediately satisfy my hunger. And just by looking at it, if we don't have a microscope, or we don't have a medical background, or we've never studied the data, we may not have the immediate ability to apprehend that it's very dangerous for our health. And so we have misperceived it. We identify this as something that is good for us, but it is a mistake. It is an error in our judgment. So the possibility always exists that something we believe that it's good, but it is not actually good. And this is going to become a huge issue in moral theology. So the question is it good? Is something good? Is the fast food good, or is the action that we're about to engage in good? Just a reminder, at the beginning of this, we said that something is good if it fulfills the nature of a creature, or it perfects the nature of the creature, or it tends towards that fulfillment. And now this can be, we're going to have this distinction here. It can be a thing like the rock or the apple, or it can be an actual act that we engage in, something that we're doing, because we're discussing moral theology here. So this is the actions that we engage in. So the thing is good if it fulfills, or the act is good if it fulfills our nature, or it leads to the fulfillment of our nature. So she's going to use the example in the text of a ball, which in itself is kind of morally indifferent. It's just a ball, right? Now, if we use the ball for something like enjoyment or entertainment or recreation, or for health purposes, all of these things could have the end of fulfilling our human nature. It helps us, grow and become healthier by, engaging in exercise, right? So in that sense, the ball and the action, the use of the ball, this is now good. However, if we use this ball to intentionally break a window, or intentionally, attack somebody, or intentionally, engage in some kind of violence, now all of a sudden we're misusing this thing, and where it was morally indifferent to begin with, now it's become something that is it could be considered evil. So we have, as I mentioned a moment ago, the possibility exists in all humans that we make an error in the judgment about an act or about an object. And this is why we require law. And this just to clarify, when I speak about law here, when she speaks about law here, we're not speaking specifically or only about civil law. Just the generic concept of law here. We'll get into this more into the next chapter, which is specifically about law. But to have a law in place enables people who perhaps have misjudged the action. Think about the issue of abortion in society today. So we've got this issue People are confused. They're not sure about the nature of this thing that's growing inside of the womb. Some people have been misinformed about this. Some people don't have the scientific background. They have misapprehended the truth. And so because of that, they could or likely will make an error in judgment in considering this issue. The law exists to inform people about what is right and wrong, even when they misapprehend, which is why it's so important to have good civil law, especially in this example of pro-life issues. Now, again, she's not at this moment yet, she's not yet speaking about civil law. She's speaking about law in general. But just to make that point, that law serves as a guidance to us, because there's always that ability for us to misperceive or to misjudge or to err in our understanding of whether an act or an object is good or evil. So she's going to speak about first divine law. And again, this is going to be, we're going to break this down more specifically in chapter 5, the next video. She's speaking about divine law, God's law. And from that, we can draw from that natural law. And then positive law, which might be church law or civil law. And all of these things should be in conformity with God's divine law. So there should not be any issues. And we all understand, since between 1973 and 2022, there was some incongruence in divine law, natural law, and the positive law, the civil law in the United States when it comes to pro-life issues. They did not match up. So there are many people who made errors in judgment, and the civil law, which should have corrected them, should have been a guidance to them to correct their misjudgment. Instead, it confirmed their misjudgment. So law serves as a guide to what it is that we know. All right, so this term that we used in the last chapter, here again, I'm going to bring this up, or she brings it up, the term free will. Okay, this is in philosophy circles. This term is becoming more and more debated. Many people are denying the existence of free will. But what is free will? Free will is an intellectual act by which the intellect, the human person who has the power of intellect, we have the power to know something, to know the truth of something, and in that truth that we know, we can identify it as something that's good. And when we know that, when our intellect knows that, the will consequently desires it or may desire it. Now, the pursuit, if the will judges, I do desire it, based on the information provided to it by the intellect, then that entire action is called the intellectual act of free will, by which we know something, we know the truth of something, and therein the good of it, and our will desires it. So we pursue it, and we pursue it. Now, if this act of pursuing this is judged correctly, we call this a true good, the apple. Okay, and this apple is actually going to be a perfect example, because I do not have a 4K camera. I have an older camera, and on this, I can see the screen over here. This apple, I've used this for a number of videos, I think for a couple of months now. On the screen, the apple looks, it's the proper shape, it's very colorful. It looks to be a beautiful apple on that screen, but in real life, it's getting kind of nasty. And so if you were looking at this apple right now and you were perceiving it as a good that you should desire, in actuality, it's not a true good. It's only an apparent good. We call that an apparent good. It's not actually truly good. It's actually getting kind of nasty. So, okay. So when it comes to morally good acts, so we've used our free will to identify the truth in something and to see therein the good, and then to choose to pursue it. There's some distinctions here that are really important that need to be made. Some acts that we can engage in are intrinsically good or intrinsically evil. Okay, this is some acts. So, for example, it is a good in itself if it leads to our fulfillment or our perfection, the perfection of our nature. For example, worshiping God is something that just by itself would fulfill our nature. On the other hand, blaspheming God is always a intrinsically evil act because it will frustrate our nature. It turns us away from the perfection of our nature. So we have these things that are intrinsically good or intrinsically evil. However, and this is very important, so we have the act. I'm going to delineate three things here. The act is the first thing, and that act may be intrinsically evil or intrinsically good or intrinsically evil. Yet, even so, the intention and the circumstance, can color or shade or change the morality of the act. So it is always good, intrinsically good to worship God, yet the intention that I bring to that act can change the morality of that act. So the example, I think she uses the example, if I remember correctly, the example of the Pharisees who are worshiping God only for show. That intention that they bring to that act has now changed something that should intrinsically be good. It's now become an act that is bad or potentially bad because it doesn't fulfill the actual purpose of perfecting the nature. Now, she's also going to define acts that are indifferent. So she gives the example, she gives a couple of examples. Reading a book or carrying a gun. Carrying a gun is a really good example here, okay? So it's indifferent to carry a gun. So let's say you have it and you're carrying it. The intention by which you are carrying this gun is going to determine the morality of that act. Are you carrying this gun for vengeance or for murder or something like that? Obviously, in that case, the act is now an evil act or potentially an evil act. Are you carrying the gun for something legitimate like self-defense or for national defense? Maybe you're in the military, or maybe you are a civil servant like a police officer. If there's a legitimate use for you to have this, then this indifferent act is now potentially a good act. Okay, now we're going to get into the question here about what the nature of evil is, and this is very important in debates that we have with atheists, with non-Christians. There's frequently this question of, if God is good, then why would He create evil? And so understanding St. Thomas's explanation of evil is very crucial in answering that question. It's important to understand that evil is not a particular being itself. For example, I am a being, you are a being, this rock is a being, this apple is a being. We exist ourselves. We do exist, but there is nothing that we could go out in the universe and find that is evil itself. What we find is we find things that are good that have been damaged. They have been corrupted. They have been injured. There is something about the good creature. So let's use the cat. This is a good example. So you've got a cat. By nature, cats should have tails. And a cat who has a tail is a good cat. We would look at the cat and we would say, oh, what a good cat. But if we see a cat that's been injured and they have lost their tail, they come up to us and they're like, oh, look, and then we start to feel bad. We feel sympathy. Oh, what happened to the poor cat? We recognize that there's something deficient or corrupt about this cat, that it's lacking in something that's supposed to be there. It's missing something. So we would not say that evil is something that exists itself, we would say that there's this good thing that has been corrupted in some way, or it's missing or lacking something that it normally should have in its nature. And since it doesn't have that, we call that an evil. St. Thomas Aquinas uses the word privation, that something is lacking that should be there. This apple is a really good example. When I first got this apple, I told my wife a couple of months ago, I said, I need an apple for one of my videos. Can you go pick out one that's beautiful, colorful, big? And she brought this home. I thought, man, this is a beautiful apple. And it was a very good apple. I know on the screen, I can see it still appears as it did months ago, but in real life, it is now lacking what it's supposed to have, the freshness, or I don't even know how you describe it. But as I touch this apple, you look at it and visually you may think, oh, that's what a beautiful apple. It's nasty, it's sticky, it's gross. I don't know how much longer it's going to stay here on the table. I might need to get a new apple to use for all of my examples. But it's lacking in something that it's supposed to have. Now, in morality, a few slides ago, I delineated those three aspects of morality: the act, the circumstances, and the intention. All three of these, this is very important. This is very important. All three must be good for the act to be morally good. If something is deficient, if it's missing one of these three, if it's missing, if the act is good, but the circumstances are good, but the intention is bad, it's lacking, the intention is not what it's supposed to be, the morality of the act is now called into question. It is potentially bad, it's potentially evil now, whereas had it had all the aspects that it should have, it would be a good act, and now it's lacking in some manner, in some way. So this is going to be the basis for moral theology moving forward, that we have the act, the circumstances, and the intentions. This became a big controversy, and I think the encyclical is called Veritatis Splendor. Saint John Paul II addressed alternate views of moral theology in this encyclical called Veritatis Splendor, in which some modern theologians were trying to create some wiggle room in this traditional perspective of moral theology, and he confirmed in Veritatis Splendor, no, in order for an act to be good, the act, the circumstances, and the intention all must be good. So, yeah. So, in conclusion, what is good? Good is something that is to be desired. We recognize by our intellect that there is something in the nature of this object or that object that is to be desired, and we pursue it, and that by pursuing it, it fulfills our nature. Okay, so in the next video, as I said, she'll discuss the nature of law, divine eternal law, natural law, and then civil law. You can watch that video by clicking right here, and for more on this topic of the good, I'm going to put a link here to an Aquinas 101 video on that same topic, which is really good. So click either here or there. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next video. What is law? I mean, why do we have laws? Where do they come from? Is it just an arbitrary